Gentlemen, and welcome to the meeting of the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And may I take this opportunity of wishing you all a very happy, peaceful and stress-free New Year. Some hopes with that, I'm sure, but there we go. Gosh, I've seen a bit of echo here. Can you all hear me? Hopefully, yeah. Not very well, sorry about that.
Picked up on
I will speak very slowly. Okay, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Celia Buxton, Donna Marriott, Maria Beanie, Victoria Aspin, Councillor Carr, Councillor Tejan and Councillor Mrs Elizabeth Turpin. Are any others? Okay, thank you. Record of the meeting. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 29th of November 2022 as being correct? Beg your pardon? I know you are. Can I sign the record of the meeting as being correct? Thank you. I have no urgent matters, so we now go on to disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests and whipping. Are there any?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got two OSIs, which are on page 129, the Curriculum Diversity. Medway Afro-Caribbean Association and Rivermead School are mentioned because they were part of the task group, and I am a trustee and governor of either.
Thank you. Any others? No. Okay, let's move on to the meat of the agenda then. Item number 5, the Medway Youth Council Annual Conference Report, which you'll find on pages 25 through 36. And please note that those in attendance for this item have to leave by 7 o'clock. So I now welcome the Chair of MYC, Rose Stokes, who's going to be supported by Roy Smith and Karen Youssef. They are both officers from the Youth Council. So Rose, is there anything you wish to add before I open up for questions? No, nothing? Can you speak into your microphone, by the way?
Okay. Oh, it works. Sorry, my apologies. Thank you. So this conference we decided to do on poverty. This is because when we found we were talking to young people, poverty was very big among the issues and problems we were thinking about. So we've had, we had over 70 participants come and around 12 schools. We found out because it was held in July, many schools were unable to attend because of end of school and exams. The recommendations that came out of our conference was that we found that MYC, Medway Youth Council, would like to continue to work with poverty and to support and reach out to young people throughout Medway who can face this issue. We found that we would like to undertake a survey on how cost of living impacts young people and circulate this through our networks. We also found that the schools itself don't have enough living skills and independence lessons, and we'd like to look into having more money management taught in schools themselves. I think those were the recommendations that we made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now opening up to the floor. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rose, for the report and indeed for all the work. I realise you're representing a lot of people that your colleagues have put into the Youth Council throughout the year, which is so appreciated, I think, by all of us. So thank you for that. I, like many other councillors, will try to attend the conferences and other events when possible, not always possible. I wasn't able to be at this one. But having read the report, it's got me thinking, as ever, about how we can best support the Youth Council. And, you know, for example, we as councillors, if we're dealing with a difficult topic, we have the advantage of officers who will give us some objective reports and information and background behind it, which is extremely useful. Whether we're objective in the end or not remains to be seen, but that's always our aim. And so I just, a general question really, I know people like Roy Smith and others are supporting the processes there, but do you feel that you're getting the support that you would like from the council? Is there any more that we could or should be doing to help the Youth Council to be a success, so that each participant gains the most from it? What more can we do to help, in your view?
So the conference itself cost us around £2,000 to do, and we also have other events, so youth awards, and all of this stuff we have to pay for ourselves, so we have to fundraise for this. So we were looking into it, and roughly NYC costs about £15,000 a year or so. And all of this money we either have to fundraise or get from sponsors, so that kind of stuff. So any funds that we were able to get would be really helpful. We're also looking into recruiting more people from a widespread of schools and young people in Medway. So lots of people who currently attend are from like certain areas. So if every councillor here, or even half of you, were able to go to secondary schools, say, can we have some representatives, or who does represent young people at NYC, come on, join us, then we can get more representatives and a better view of how Medway is for young people.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope, Chair, that's noted. I, for one, would be happy to support in that way if I possibly can, if I'm given the information and know what's required. Regarding funding, I guess that would have to be picked up elsewhere. That's not our remit here this evening, but I think the point would have been heard and noted, and perhaps that can be picked up. Thank you for that.
Clive.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rosie, and everybody else at NYC and the officers that support you for the report. Those of us who have been on this committee for a little while will know how important the NYC report is to the work of this committee each year. The report comes to us, and it's always an important contributor to the work that we do. It's always a revelation to us, I think. It's really important that this committee hears the authentic voices of Medway's young people, and it's important, I think, those of us on the committee are able to take those voices into account in the work that we do over the year. The focus on individual issues as the years go by has always been revelatory. I think back, from my own point of view, I've mentioned on a number of occasions the report on racism from, I think, pre-pandemic, which was a real revelation to me about the impact that racism was having on young people within Medway, and my own rather sort of the assumptions that I was making about racism. And we've got that topic coming up later, I think, partly as a consequence of that report all those years ago. Just a couple of quick points. I think the levels of poverty that we're currently enduring, that young people are currently enduring, are a relatively new thing. I've said in public before, so I'll say it again, I come from a working class family, two parents who were working, but who were able to afford to pay the rent, to put food on the table, for us to have birthdays and Christmases and holidays. And I know from my experience as a ward councillor how difficult that is for people, even people who are working, two-parent households who are working, just how difficult that is. And that is a change, I think, over the last few years. As a teacher, I was always very keen, as this report is, on practical skills being taught within schools. The report indicates money skills in particular. I remember when I was an assistant head at Chatham, one of the initiatives that I was quite keen on as part of our move towards becoming a business and enterprise school was to teach money skills to young people at key stages 4 and 5. For various reasons that didn't happen. One of the background reasons for that is the pressure that there is on the curriculum more generally. But we should be teaching young people skills about money, savings, interest, how mortgages work, all of those things, and basic budgeting. And again, later in this committee, we've got a paper on the curriculum. You also mentioned allotments, which is a subject close to my heart, since both I and my wife have an allotment. And so I think there are important practical things that schools can do, and we as a system can do. And I'd be interested in any comments that you have on those. The report's very full, so there may not be anything you want to add. But I'd also make a note of that particular requirement, and I think that is particularly important it's very difficult for schools to be able to manipulate their curriculums, but I think it's vital that we start to do that. And finally, Chair, if I may, the NYC reports have been recommended to full council by us in previous years. I think that's a really important tradition, and at the appropriate time, I'd like to formally recommend, that this report goes to full council at the earliest opportunity, and I'm hoping that we'll have cross-party support on that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
And Rosie.
Do you want to respond, Rose?
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Right. I'd just like to bear in mind that I need to put a guillotine on this for 7 o'clock because Rose and her colleagues have to leave. So if you can restrict the narrative as much as possible, that will be a kindness. Okay, Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Rose, and thank you for your dynamic speech at Priestfields as well. I thought that was really, really useful. I think poverty, personally, is a political choice, and my ward is one of the poorest wards in Medway, in Chatham, and I think poverty really does impact on our children because, for instance, the piece of casework I'm dealing with at the moment, family are having to move, and this is the 3rd time they've moved, and a set of children are at their 3rd school, all in the Medway area, but because they cannot get proper housing, they're having to move. Now, unpacking that means that, you know, there are some mental health issues with the children and the family. So I think that, you know, you as a youth council are really discussing hot topics, but I do think they're a political choice, this one. Also, as councillors, we get some ward funding, so it might be opportune for your guys to write to us maybe in April, because we get a certain amount, a couple of £1,000 per ward, and as we've all got children and you are all our future, it might be good if we could perhaps agree a princely sum that you can have towards doing the events that are really well attended and needed in Medway, so thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Okay. Do you want to come back on that at all? No? Don't have to. Keith.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question for Rose, because we, the Medway Parents and Carers Forum, represent parents and carers of youngsters with disabilities and special educational needs, and we would like to hold out a hand of friendship and make sure that you contact us when you get the survey out, so that we can get it. I can give you our email address later if you like. Okay? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Suzu.
Thank you, Chair. I was really pleased to see the research that you looked into, the NHS research that's shown that poverty has negative impacts on children's health, the social determinants of health. And the children born in poverty are more likely to experience health problems, including nutrition, chronic diseases, mental health problems. So my question is, because you wrote there that as a group you wish to explore this further, are you looking to do a research with your findings from NHS, like a primary research? You're doing a qualitative, quantitative research, or is it something that you're just going to look at as a whole and make recommendations? I just wondered how you're going to go about, and what can we do as councillors or as a council to help assist this, and are you engaging with public health department in this area to tackle the issues that we're facing here in Medway? Thank you.
Right, thank you. So we are looking to run almost a survey to send around to schools to see what people know. I think we're going to work with a member of Youth Parliament we have to do almost a project to find out how this is affecting young people even more and get a wider spread across Medway. Once we've found out this information, I think we're going to look at contacting other organisations That's as far as we know for now, because it's kind of in the works. But when we get more information, we can let you know. Thank you.
You know, please give us a shout.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say thank you, Rose, and as always impressed with your conferences and what you do and what you think of and looking for the future. It saddens me when I read about the young having mental health problems. That really does disturb me, because you should be enjoying your life and not having worries. So I think that if we can help in any way possible, I mean, I'm not sure about pastoral roles in school any longer. I have very little, but I know that when I was at Chatham Grammar, we had an outstanding pastoral service. Do schools still offer that in a big way that will be able to support you?
So we do get support at schools, but I think there's not enough support. So there's support there, but it's not enough of it for the growing need that's happening. And with prices rising and mental health is getting worse.
It is.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And perhaps now, the other thing I wanted to say, at one time, Roy, the youth parliament, not the youth parliament, the youth centres used to help with financial things. We used to have, when I was at the Will Adams one, we used to have people come down there where we used to help some of the youth, helping with their money and their budgets. Do we no longer do that?
I'm not entirely sure which project in particular you're talking to. I think we've done a lot of projects in the youth service around that over the years. I think if there's a specific project it'd be useful to know about. I think we do that as part of the youth service work across the board. In terms of what the Youth Council's referring to there, I think it's a broader picture than that. I think there's been individual projects, but a lot of those haven't been necessarily had financial sustainment from the council in terms of that. So it's been quite often fundraised to be able to do those activities.
I can't help it. I do know, Roy, that when I was at the youth centre, it was well taken up, and we used to help them with their bank, showing them how to do. Well, actually, I think they used to show us, especially when it was all online. I just wondered if that was still continuing.
Yes.
That's all. It is.
Yes,
well,
yeah.
that's a positive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pat.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rosie, for coming to us and giving us your report. I was very interested to see that you've been talking to the Food Bank and the Gillingham Street Angels. As we know, Gillingham Street Angels are doing an excellent job, and to find out that it's embarrassing for people queuing up to go and get food from there is quite an eye-opener, because I see this myself, and I've been speaking to people who've been queuing up, so thank you for that information. Excuse me, my voice is going. I was interested in the references that you're making regarding the poverty, and one thing that I've highlighted, there was also a discussion about period poverty, and I do know that we used to have the Red Box scheme at one time, where we were able to place items that were needed in the red box. So I'm just wondering if that scheme was going to be reinvented, because I thought that was quite useful. I myself actually was helping with that, so that's something. But yeah, you've really highlighted what we are all thinking about poverty, and the words that are written here are very telling. And the young people's feelings and what they're saying is really telling us that there are a lot of issues that we really need to get to grips with. And the young people are not backward in coming forward and telling us what's going on. So thank you very much for your report, and I hope that when you do this review that we will be able to help you more.
Thank you, Pat. Okay. No other member? I refer to Susan.
I was just going to ask if I could ask a question before I do the recommendation, if that's okay. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Rose, for coming. And welcome to our committee. I hope you have a very successful year. Obviously, the issue that you are dealing with here is quite a topical one, and it's really, really important to hear how our young people are perceiving the problems, not just the adults talking about them. So thank you so much to you and your team for putting this together. Obviously, you're speaking on behalf of young people. And in terms of school, I want to understand how or whether you were able to involve our virtual school in this. So just trying to understand how you captured the range of young people's voices that we have here in Medway. Were you able to work with our virtual school and to obviously get involved, looked after children as well? And also, it's a good thing to hear that, obviously, going forward, you still want to keep working on this topic. I wonder if in the future, when you do bring a report on poverty like this, just if it's possible to break it down either in key stages areas so that we can see what, those who are in key stage 3 are thinking about, how they're thinking about poverty, those in key stage 5, those in key stage 2, just to give us an understanding of, how this is affecting our young people, not grouping them all together, but in different stages of life. I wonder if that's going to be, that's going to you, Roy, as well, if that's going to be possible to bring the report in that format to give them a deeper understanding of how they perceive poverty. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of that sort of level of detail with the report, it would need for a start, a piece of research like that would need a bit of substantial funding behind it to be able to make that work. The Youth Council relies heavily on young people volunteering and being involved, as well as schools choosing to participate. So it's very hard sometimes to get a definite that you're going to get the responses from everywhere you would want to get, which would require quite a significant amount of field work. I think that's not to denigrate anything the Youth Council's doing, but I think it would be fair to say to be able to get that level of detail and that level of analysis would require some financial investment to be able to achieve that.
Okay. Okay, Vice Chair.
Again, thank you for the report and for being here. Chair, I move that we note the report. In addition, I would like to take up the recommendation from Councillor Johnson that we recommend this to full council.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Thorne. And is that agreed? Agreed? Thank you. Okay, you can now depart. Past is new. And thank you for attending. Look forward to seeing you next year. Okay. Moving on to item 6, the Adoption Partnership South East Regional Adoption Agency, the annual report for 2022, which you'll find in your papers on pages 37 through 122. Sarah Skinner is in attendance for this report. So, Sarah, is there anything you wish to add before I open the report for debate?
No.
Fine. Members? Pat?
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for coming. Sorry if my voice goes a bit tinny. The adopter voice, item 8. I was just interested to ask if how many prospective adopters have been adopted themselves. That's my first question. The second question is on the ongoing and future developments on page 71, section 12. It references the third bid has been submitted to develop a multidisciplinary centre of excellence in the service, and we await the decision. If successful, the funding will be for the period April 23rd, etc. So have we had any indication yet whether we're going to get this funding? And the last one is just a sort of a point of questioning, really, because I should know the answer to this, but I don't. If, for instance, a person who is trying to adopt, a partner dies or they get a divorce or something like this, and a new person comes in that wants or doesn't want to do this, I expect that they will be assessed as well, because this would be a new person coming into a child's life. I'm just wondering if that they would have to go through the whole process all over again.
Okay, so if I go with question 1 first of all, we wouldn't keep records on whether our adopters have been adopted themselves. That would be something that would come out during the assessment process and would be included within their report as part of their own sort of journey and their own learning and their own views about having been adopted if they are adopted. But we don't run a report on that. We don't capture the information in that way. I think your second point was in relation to the bids and whether we've heard about the third bid. Unofficially, I have heard that we have been successful with the recruitment of a therapist, so that we will then be able to move forwards to provide a consistent service across the whole region. Because currently we do have a team of clinicians, but they are funded solely by KCC, so we can only use those clinicians to support Kent families. So this will now provide an opportunity for us to open this up across the region, so we're really quite excited about that. But as I say, that's unofficial. I haven't yet received the formal document. I've actually got a meeting about it early tomorrow morning, so, but fingers crossed. And then in terms of your third question, so once an adoption order is granted, the adoptive parents are the legal guardians of those children. So if, like any other family, the parents then go on to separate, they are both still legally the parents of the adopted child. If one of them remarries, in the same way that a step-parent doesn't acquire the parental responsibility of their partner's birth child unless they go through a formal process. So they could do that if an adoptive parent was to divorce from the other adoptive parent and then were to remarry, and that second partner then wanted to apply to adopt, then we would consider that in the same way as we would consider a step-parent adoption. That it's not that common, if I'm honest with you. It's very rare that comes forward. But certainly once adopters have adopted, they remain the legal parents, and then everything really mirrors what happens in a family where the children have been born to those parents.
Okay. Wendy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. And I'd like to give my personal thanks to everybody that's been involved with the adoption team, because I think we've done outstanding. I was disappointed that Medway never got outstanding and it was only Kent, but I share in your joy because the staff work extremely hard and I think we should be very proud of what they've done. Having said that, I'm going to back Cathy Yates with her comments about panel and virtual panel. I do think sometimes on it now, because it's a virtual panel, they do bring their children along, etc., and it isn't always acceptable. So I do hope that, I think we have made it clear at panel that we would like it to be as if we were all in a thing. But that's the only complaint that I've got, because I think that actually we have done extremely well. And the other question I would like to ask, we always tell people that there will be support for them, and rightly so, and we do give excellent support as well. But I just wonder how long that lasts, because you do know they can adopt a child, they don't know what the outcome is, and then when we say to people, you know, in 2 or 3 years' time, this child might develop, and because they're absolutely fabulous, aren't they, most of these people that adopt children, and they say, you know, we haven't got a magic ball or whatever it is, or all we know is that we will accept and go for help if we need it. How long does that help lead? You know, how long do we go on helping and supporting families? That was a long-winded way of saying it, wasn't it, Sarah? Okay, that's okay, I can answer that. So thank you, Councillor Purdy, for your comments, very positive comments, and hopefully Medway will achieve outstanding before too long. In terms of the panels, we have done a survey and that has come back. Actually, a lot of people do quite like the virtual panels. I do agree with you that I think what's happened, and I think the report that's contained in this report was dated, where are we now? It was dated quite some time ago. And I think what's happened is as we've come out of COVID, we've been able to improve our virtual panels. So you will know that to start with, we had technical issues and people found it quite difficult and quite unusual to be, particularly prospective adoptive parents, found it quite difficult to be talking on a screen, and it felt very strange to them. As time has gone on, what we found is that our adopters now are more equipped to do that, and what we've also made sure of is that whereas in COVID, it wasn't possible for the adoption social worker to go and be with the adopters when they were on screen because of the COVID restrictions. That has now moved on, and so we have our adoption social workers alongside the adopters in their home so that they can comment and support the adopters in the same way that they would have done when there was a physical panel meeting. So I think we will continue to review panels. And I think some people like the virtual panels, a lot of people like the virtual panels, but I do take your point that, you know, we have to make sure that if we're losing something, then how do we make sure that we end up, you know, capturing that in a way that is positive for everybody. And I have met with Kathy quite recently, actually, and we did talk about panels. So I know she's an avid supporter of physical panels, but there are other people who actually like the virtual panels. In terms of your other question about adoption support, we really aim to provide a flexible service. So when children are going through the adoption process and there is a plan for a child, an adoption plan for a child, we as in the global, with the local authority and the RAA, will work together to look at what the adoption plan is at that time for the child. And I agree with you that sometimes the needs of a child are known at that point. They will always develop and always change, but there may be quite a good grasp of a child's needs at that point. But also, we may find that actually a very young child, we have limited understanding about what their needs are. We know their history, we know their pre-birth history, so we can forecast and predict potential issues for that child, but we can never be certain. So what we aim to do is to make sure that when a child is placed, we provide quite a comprehensive support package. So that will include the adoption social worker who has assessed the adopters if they're still in place, and hopefully they are, because we do have a good retention of our social workers, that they will support those adopters, particularly at that early stage when the child has joined their family and they're just all getting used to each other and are just going through the motions of adjusting to family life. The child social worker will remain involved, so which obviously is really helpful, particularly if, again, the social worker has been involved for quite some time and really know that child and know some of the history for that child. And then thirdly, we can apply for the adoption support funding so that we can bring in some therapeutic support for families, pre-adoption order being granted. And we've moved increasingly to that because what we found is that children have waited longer during COVID, and so some of their complexities have increased as compared to perhaps a few years ago. And then moving on through that journey when the adoption order is granted, again, some families want to just go away and you know, forget the local authority for a while, and some actually have a package of support already in place. So if they've had a package of support around therapeutic support, that will continue. But for those who choose and feel actually that they don't need support at that time, but then later on come back to us, then the door is open for them to do that. So we run a support and advice line service, and families, parents can contact us and have a conversation with a social worker and the adoption support team. And then depending on the needs that are identified, that will then, we will either signpost, potentially we might signpost. Sometimes the issues are involving education and some complexities for a child in school, and we might then signpost to the virtual schools. We have good relationships with the 3 virtual schools across the region, and that works incredibly well. But we also, you know, provide adoption support, adoption social work support to families. We run a sort of different learning and development program. So we run a whole range of training programs for families that they can access. And then if actually the needs require it, then again, we can apply for adoption support funding and seek therapeutic support for families. And then families, if they're presenting issues decrease and they feel actually they don't need us anymore, that's absolutely fine. We will close the case. But 6 months, a year, 3 years later, other issues might arise. Children, when they reach teenage years, they're very curious about their identity, and parents might then want to come back and seek some support from us around just the child's life story and how they support that, how they support the child with that. So what we aim to do is have a sort of a revolving door, really, so that parents can come to us, seek support, we provide it. Hopefully, we would aim for it not to be continuous, because we hope that we will be able to reach a position with parents and with the child that they feel they no longer need us, but then they can come back to us if they want to. And we provide that all the way up into a child's adulthood. Actually, Sarah, that's helpful, because I always get concerned, especially with fetal alcohol syndrome and things like that. That might not show itself until they're 7 or 8. But I often wonder when we're sitting there and we're giving our recommendations, what am I doing? Are we, because we all like to have it, the little cottage with the roses round the door, and think everybody's going to go off and be happy ever after. But as David Jandal used to say to me, that doesn't happen, Wendy. And I have learnt that over the years. So I am glad that people can, when we say they're going to get support, they...
Yeah.
And fetal alcohol clearly is an emerging issue that I think we're all learning about, including health professionals. And so I'm aware that there is a lead person within the Kent and Medway CAM service. And we have provided training to our social workers from the FASD awareness group, which is led by parents. And we are also having conversations, I'm having conversations with other RAAs around the fetal alcohol syndrome and how we can support parents. So I think that's something that we are all learning at this moment. And we are hopefully asking those questions so that when we can read in a child's report that actually there clearly was alcohol abuse, then, or maybe even just suspected alcohol abuse, that we can aim to prepare our adoptive parents for what that might look like and what that might mean, and therefore what support they might need, and make it less frightening, I think, really. So that's what we're aiming to do with that, and we have started working on that. It's all right, that's fine.
Thank you, Wendy. Siju.
Thank you, Chair. You sort of touched on my question, so with regards to permanency in adoption, because oftentimes adoption does not work out, especially when the child has developed ambivalent and resistant attachment, and they're just not having that secure attachment with their adoptive parent. My question was, what support is there? Is the support there throughout the childhood, right up to which you touched that there is, but what happens if the placement just doesn't work out with the adoptive parents? What happens there? Do we move them on? Because I have come across situations where a child will run back to the biological parents, even though they have complex needs, they have all kinds of, you name the issue, the whole 9 yards, abusive parents and everything, and the parents could be across the country up north, and the child is running back, to where they were born and where they grew up. Is there a way of dealing with issues like that?
Yes, so in terms of disruptions pre-order, so before the adoption order is granted, they are not that common. I think since, I'm looking at some data in front of me, since October of last year, we've had one placement disruption, one child disrupted for one Medway child disrupted. And we know the reasons for that, and we support the child and we support the adopters when that happens. So if that happens, if a placement disrupts, if a child is with a prospective adopters and for various reasons, we can't progress to an adoption order, then the child will return to care, and then there will then be a review of that child's care plan, whether adoption is the right care plan, or whether whether the care plan needs to be changed. And obviously the social worker who supports the child will be involved with that child and very much obviously with the plan. I think if you're talking about moving forward X many years, adopted children have issues like other children have issues. I've already touched on the round at the teenage years with identity, and I think that is a time when actually those issues come to the surface. I think obviously what makes it more difficult these days is around social media, and that parents were probably able to keep a bit of a protective scaffolding around teenagers and young people for longer than they're able to now. And I think the situation that you're talking about is very much, that's when things go really wrong. And so for one of the things that we aim to do, and we do in the training, and we aim to really support adopters with, is thinking about contact and thinking about the child's identity right from the very beginning. So when prospective adopters are attending preparation training, we have quite a detailed part of that training looking at identity and looking at contact and the reasons for contact. And very often prospective adopters, and I read all of the reports, I read all of the adopters' reports that we approve, and very often adopters, because one area is about what have they learned through the training, and very often they will say, actually, they came to adoption thinking, well, why would anyone want contact? You know, sometimes these children have suffered severe neglect and abuse, and actually, why would we as a local authority be thinking about a contact? And then they come to the training and they move and they shift and their thinking shifts, because what they're able to see is actually it's not for the adults, it's for the child and then the young person. And what we find is that actually where adopters can be quite open with a child, and certainly now in terms of telling a child they're adopted, it's absolutely very clear that actually a child should grow up knowing that they are adopted and not told at the age of 7 or 8, or find out when they're looking in a box when they're older. And so very much so that it should be as open as possible. And if a child understands that they're adopted, they have a life story book. The whole idea about bringing adopted children together and letting them have fun together and just see other children that have been adopted. You know, sometimes their eyes light up and they go, oh, they're adopted too. That's great, because I actually don't know any other adopted children in my class, but they're adopted. So it's about normalising adoption as much as we can. And what we do find is that certainly in teenage years, if parents can be as open as possible and really support their teenager and their child to think about, actually, is it safe to go on social media? And if they're really, really keen and they want to know more, then to help them with that, rather than keep it as a secret, and then the child does it themselves, and they just go and, you know, they can navigate social media probably much better than any of us. So what we really aim to do is to encourage parents to do that. If that does happen and it goes wrong, or parents are worried, then they can come back to us in adoption support, and we will support them with that. We also commission a service from Bernardo's which supports contact, and they will liaise with birth parents and with the adopters and really think about, you know, what is in the child's interest. So it may be that actually the plan that was agreed when the child was younger needs to be reviewed, and that contact arrangement needs to be changed and updated. So we're constantly developing, we're constantly learning all the time, and we have to try and move with what we learn, really. And that's what we aim to do, and support adopters to do that as well.
In addition to what Sarah's outlined, adoption is highly regulated, absolutely highly regulated. So any undue influence on a legal arrangement, the court looks at very dimly. So there are guarantees within the system. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few questions. My first one relates to budgets, so items 6.2 and 6.4, though I don't know if 6.3 is missing from the paper. In 2021-2022, you had what considered an 8% underspend on your budget, so you didn't spend the money, and yet this year you've requested additional funding from us. Can I ask, if you've spent less money last year and you've actually underspent by 8%, why is it that we're giving you additional money in this year's budget? That's my first question. My second question is, this is a fantastic document and it does compare us with other authorities, so Bexley and other authorities. What it doesn't do is compare us with other regional adoption agencies around the country. So my question is first of all, in next year's or future reports, I'll be quite interested to see the other RAA averages. Now, I've done some research on some of the other RAA averages, and I'm going to refer to page 56 in the report, which is looking at the timescale indicator. It's a table that's located there. And you have on the timescale indicator Bexley, Kent and Medway. Medway appears, and whilst I appreciate other people are celebrating, Medway appears to be significantly, if I'm reading this correctly, above national in terms of placement order decisions and other types of activities. So if I look at the national picture, it's 199 days on average for matched, and placed is 214 days. So the question I have is, why is Medway such an outlier in comparison to other authorities? That's my second question. Just in relation to page 56, the time scale indicators there. My third question is relating to the structure of the RAA. Again, there are numerous structures around the country of how RAAs are comprised. The initial RAAs were comprised with very centralised operations, and there's been an evolution in RAAs to a more decentralised operation over the course of the last 5 years. In the press at the moment, a number of RAAs are considering their model by looking at other RAAs and how they're working, and many are looking to change their model. Can I ask whether or not that conversation is happening at the moment within your RAA? Is it efficient? Is it scalable? Because I know the government's requirement is for you to have a pan-regional approach, and yet this seems to be a much smaller operation as part of the DfE guidance on RAAs. And is it the case that are you looking to expand your operation or change the way that you are currently managing the governance of your organisation? So that's my third question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The financial question, your number one question, basically when we've had a new RAA, COVID hit, we have yet to bottom out what the budget should look like. What I do know, and if Mariah was here, she would be saying Medway has actually got quite a good deal at the moment. We're in a RAA with 2 outstanding children's services, Kent and Bexley. Medway, the share of the budget will need to be bottomed out in the next financial year, and Sarah's been put on notice to do that. But COVID actually did not allow us to see what the operating budgets were. So we took a liberal view on that, because any underspend coming back into the local authority would not be forthcoming if Sarah had come to me and said, actually, we need some more money. So we've taken a liberal look at this. And by the next financial year, we will have a better right-sized service. The question, your third question, no, there isn't any conversations along those lines in terms of altering the structure. I'm pleased about that because of what I've just said. You know, to be in a partnership with 2 outstanding local authorities is good for Medway. Councillor Purdy raised before that she was disappointed Medway wasn't outstanding. Well, we will get our chance later in the year, and I think the weight of Kent's outstanding judgment and Bexley's will go to Medway's favour. So at the moment, there isn't any discussions along the lines that you've described. There may well be in the future. So that's questions 1 and 3, and I'll let Sarah deal with 2.
And also, if I can just add to that, in terms of the models of RAAs, we were one of the last RAAs to become formalised. And so a lot of the first round and probably the second round of RAAs went into a 2P arrangement whereby staff were moved from their own local authority into a different local authority. And there was a lot of discussion between the DCSs and others within our region, and it was very clear that the preference was not to do that, but it was actually to have a partnership model. So in my view, actually, a lot of the RAAs are looking at the partnership model because they see that that is working, and staff are content with that. There are differences, terms and conditions, not hugely, but there are still some different terms and conditions, and actually staff accept those because they recognise that that was what they wanted alongside senior managers across the region. So I don't see more RAAs going into the 2P arrangement. If anything, I think some of them are beginning to question, would a partnership arrangement be suitable for them? And in terms of expanding, there are no intentions to expand. We work really closely, so in terms of a pan-region, we work really closely with Adoption South East, which covers Brighton, Hove, East and West Sussex and Surrey. And we also work closely with Adoption South, which covers Hampshire, Portsmouth, Isle of Wight, and one other, and I can't remember what it is, Southampton. So we do have a pan-regional approach in that I meet with those heads of service, but also we bring together our management team so that we can look at how do we undertake recruitment, how do we undertake adoption support, and what can we learn from each other just within the South East region, as well as linking up with the national team and other RAA leaders from across the country. And there's a lot of collaboration, which is really positive, and a lot of people share their own policies, procedures and ways of working, so that does work. Now onto the data. Can I just ask you again, just if you could just be specific for me in terms of which particular data set you're looking at?
That's absolutely fine. So it's page 56, and it's placement order matched. With decision children matched in a year, and it's the first and the third one because they're the ones that I've got some national data on. I don't have national data on the second and fourth one, incidentally. I've tried to find it and I couldn't. The first question I have on the data is why is Medway it's taking so much longer for placement matching to occur in Medway, 203, I'm presuming that's days, versus 74.57 for the other local authority. So that's a massive difference, which to me raises sort of a flag. Is it unique circumstances here? Why is it that we're worse? And in addition to that, whilst this compares us with Bexley and Kent, it might also be more helpful just to have a national comparator there, because actually Bexley and Kent are just far stronger than even the national picture by a long stretch. And it just been helpful to have that national context, because it makes it look like that we're an outlier and quite a serious outlier, when actually we're not that much of an outlier compared. So I'm actually trying to, in some ways, give you some help. But secondly, I do kind of want to know why we're so different. Is it unique local circumstances? Is it a lack of resources? Is it that we need more resources? What is the rationale behind that difference?
So the 2019-20 figures and the 2020 figures, a lot of those children were before we went into the RAA. So when we went into the RAA, we had a significant number of Medway children who had a placement order but were not matched, and we were then able to match them during that year. So actually that was a good news story for Medway children, because we were able to utilise adopters, approved and waiting adopters from Kent and from Bexley at that time. So though that these figures are quite historical, and I don't know if Leanne wants to comment on that, but so we'd certainly inherited children who had been waiting for quite some time, and I think what you'll see is that actually we are progressing with that, and we are making some improvements to that. So 21-22, it was 161 days in terms of placement order to match. The second figure
relates to children who have been adopted. So again, those are quite historical, because once the children are placed, and then obviously there is a period of time, and then particularly with COVID, it has taken quite some time for adoption orders and adoption hearings to go through. So the first figure and the third figure are the figures. Certainly the top figure is the figure that we monitor very, very closely. So the target is 121 days. In terms of the government target for placement order to matching decision. So you'll see that for even for Bexley, we exceeded that, and there are particular reasons for that. So there are particular children, and we know the reasons for that. So I report on that to the board. We meet quarterly with the board, and for those children where there are exceptions, we report to the board, and we are able to provide the narrative as to what the reasons for that might be. And it can be a whole range of reasons. So there can be, some of them are due to the complexity of a child's needs, some of them may be due to an appeal that has taken place in the court, so they've got the placement order, but then there's a subsequent appeal. So there's a range of reasons, and we do make sure that the DCSs are aware of the reasons for that. In terms of the third figure, that really relates to when children enter care and then when they're placed for adoption. And what we do know, again, is that during the COVID period, there have been significant delays with care proceedings for obvious reasons, but also what that has meant is that those delays have then potentially gone on to cause further delay because there was a delay because of the court process and because of the COVID. But then what happens is that by the time a case is before the court, parents and their solicitors may argue and ask for a reassessment because time has gone by since their child was first removed from their care. So that figure is significantly affected and impacted by delays in the court process, and that's national. I mean, that's been a national issue that's been raised. And again, I don't know if Leanne wants to comment.
I mean, basically, these figures are picking up Medway's inadequate performance, and it was judged inadequate, as we all know, and those figures are feeding through. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, can I suggest that in that table that we include national benchmarks as well, just for future reference, so that we can make those comparisons, if I might suggest, as a member's suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for the very detailed report and a lot of positive work that's gone into it. Can I just sort of pick up a bit on what Councillor Osborne has been saying? It is a very full and detailed report, and I found myself at times reading it and wondering what conclusion I should be drawing. And I think what Councillor Osborne has said has been a bit of an indication of that. So there is an enormous amount of information that's probably very readily understood by you all as professionals. I think less well understood what conclusions we should be drawing. So if in future iterations that can be sort of borne in mind, I think that would be useful for us. And that there is more of a specific, I think, on that. The review, which the earlier this year, RRAs were offered the opportunity of having an independent review of their adoption support services. So that seems very positive. So that's page 68, it's very positive. There's a list of bullet points talking about the positives that came out of that review, and ends with a short sentence: a development plan and key priorities will be integrated into the business plan. I take that to mean that there were areas for development identified in that review, because otherwise there wouldn't be a need for a development plan. But the report, as far as I can see, doesn't include those. And actually, I think it needed to, so that we were aware of what those areas for development would be. I think we as a committee are probably a little sensitive on the subject, because prior to the inadequate report in 2019, my feeling is that we tended to get reports which focused on the positive and tended to minimise a touch on the less good. And I'm not saying that there's going to be a long list of them, but I think for us, to be fair to us, as being the ones meant to hold the system to account, we do need to know that. can I ask, the report says about partnership with families, and I think it does indicate some areas where that probably happens. So you talk about the voices of young people and the voices of families. I wonder if that's the process of partnership with families. And if it is, I just wonder if you could point to some outcomes of where that partnership or those voices have been listened to and have had an impact on the service, if that's possible. Secondly, one of the issues in the Ofsted report was about early permanence planning. I just wondered what impact there's been over the last few years on early permanence, and I appreciate there are problems with the court system which may or may not have an impact. So those specific two questions. Very finally, well done for putting Kent in charge of complaints. I just wonder whether we could do that across the council, that if you've got a complaint about Medway that you direct it to Kent. I think that would be a very positive thing. Sorry. On those other aspects, Sarah. Thank you.
So on the complaints, I still have to write the letter. Doesn't matter which authority it goes through, I still have to write the response. In terms of the early permanence, I'll work backwards, I think. In terms of early permanence, we've placed 60 children in early permanence placement since we went live in November 2020, which is good. We have presented to the judiciary in Kent and Medway, who responded very favourably. We did that in November at their conference. They respond very, very favourably to that. We presented yesterday, in fact, to CAFCAS, the team of guardians who obviously represent children in court. And again, that was well received and that was really helpful. With regards to how we have a dedicated early permanence team, and I think we're quite unique actually in the country in terms of having a dedicated early permanence team. And that team consists of permanency planning leads who link in very closely with the 3 local authority social work teams so that we can identify very early on the children who might well have an adoption plan. It may not be an adoption plan, but it might be. And therefore we can start working with social workers to plan for that potential. And then once an agency decision maker agrees that adoption is the local authority's care plan, it may not be agreed by the court, but as soon as the ADM, agency decision maker, agrees that adoption is the plan, we will then allocate a family finding social worker, and that social worker will remain with that child. It doesn't remove the support and the responsibility of the local authority social worker, but it means that we have a dedicated person who is working with the child social worker looking at family finding. So in terms of early permanence, we do a lot, as I've said, really to engage other parts of the organisation, not just our own organisations, but in terms of the courts and CAFCAS. We have secured some funding. I think I put in my report that one of the sources of funding was actually to support our early permanence workforce. And we were successful with that. So we have commissioned Bernardo's, who are already commissioned to provide birth parent counselling, but we've commissioned them using the money from the DFE to provide an enhanced service to support birth parents whose children are placed in early permanence placements. And we are also then using the DFE money to support our social workers so they can really provide quite hands-on support to our early permanence carers. Because our early permanence carers walk a really difficult line. We're asking them to commit and to bond with a child, but at the same time recognise that actually the care plan may not be adoption, the court may not agree with adoption, and therefore those same carers who are asking to love and care for a child might actually be asked to return a child to their birth family. And that, if the court decides that, and that's the right thing for a child, then they will absolutely do that. So it's a fine line, and we're trying to make sure that we support our carers, and they're not adopters at that stage. They are approved adopters, but at that stage, their position is as a foster carer. What we have found is, again, I've talked a little bit about the delays with the court processes. So we found that actually children are in those placements for longer than they would have been previously. And so therefore children, hopefully are growing attached to their carer, and certainly the carers are growing attached to the children. So we need to make sure that we provide the support to both birth parents, who then we can hope will understand if their child is deemed by the court to require adoption. They know who their child is with. And we talked about contact earlier, and the idea is that we want to promote the relationship between the birth parent and the early permanence carer in a way that hopefully will then facilitate contact, because all of that scariness about who are these people and who has got my child and what are the birth parents like, how could they do this to this child, so that we can try and break all of that down and then start at a really early stage to support and promote contact. So there's a lot of work going on with our early permanence. We're very much linked up with the national team on early permanence. We provide, one of our managers has led on early permanence for quite some time, and she and a team manager will be presenting at a conference in February on our early permanence scheme to other RAAs across the country, and also to other professionals within all of the local authorities within I think we've got two representatives from Medway going, 2 representatives from Kent. We had 2 places for each local authority in our RAAs. So we're very positive about our early permanence scheme, and we promote it as best we can when we feel it's in the right interest, best interest of a child. And then I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first question. Partnership. So we have an adopter advisory board. We have a conference in November with parents. And so we do aim to listen to what parents are saying. So I guess just off the top of my head, in terms of what we've done differently, I think we had an advisory board where I was talking about certain things, and they were saying, parents were saying that they weren't aware of some of this. So we've made sure that we send out monthly bulletins to parents. Again, that's a bit of a fine line because we all receive too many emails, but we send out quite a succinct sort of communication to parents to let them know about what the resources are, if there's new books, if there's new online resources that they can access. We do that. We've also worked in the conference. We also had a discussion with parents about the contact service that's run from Barnardo's, and as a result of a conversation that took place there, Barnardo's agreed to provide regular virtual workshops so that parents can dip in and dip out as they want to, and it's again just trying to break down some of the scariness around contact. And then obviously we collect feedback from parents, and we aim to, I guess, communicate with them. They come to summer picnics, they come to Christmas parties. That's a good opportunity for us to have sort of informal chit-chats and actually to see children, see how they're growing and what have you. So we do aim to work in partnership with parents. And when issues are raised, we will do our very best to try and resolve them if we can.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a comprehensive report, but excuse me if I may have missed it, but obviously as a trustee of a group who represent parents and carers with youngsters with disabilities, and having adopted 2 children with disabilities myself, they're now grown up, but we know from experience that they are the hardest to place, but there wasn't any sort of mention in the report I saw about how Medway compares with other councils in relation to placing children with more complex needs.
So in terms of, I think each of the 3 local authorities' case management systems will have a reporting for a child with a disability, a formal disability. But what we find is that actually the numbers of children with a recognised disability coming through for adoption are quite slim. What we find is that children have complex needs, but they're not recognised as disabled necessarily at the time they come through to adoption. Now, they may go on as they grow older, and then they will be diagnosed with a formal disability. But at the point that they come to us in adoption, very few actually have a recognised disability. But as I said, then they can grow and go on to be recognised as having a particular need, whether that's autism, ADHD, other things as well. Yeah.
And do they get extra support? Because obviously, more complex the needs.
Yeah, so we do try. I mean, we're an adoption support service, so our specialism is in adoption. But you will know that disabled children will have needs that relate to their disability, not necessarily to their adoption status. And the same is true for teenagers. So teenagers will have particular needs. Some of those might be related to adoption. Some of them actually won't necessarily be related to adoption. So what we aim to do is to work in partnership, to use that word, but with other teams within the 3 local authorities. Because what we find is that we often have families who come through to us in adoption support, where a need has been recognised, and that child may be open to the disabled children's team, or it may not, in which case we will then have conversations with the disabled children's team to identify and to highlight why we feel actually that needs of that child go beyond the adoption support team. So we will aim to do that, and certainly in terms of children with autism and ADHD, we work with CAMS. We have a number of children who are waiting very long time for assessments, and so we try and support the families and parents as best we can with some of those. But again, we are not CAMS experts, we are not mental health experts. So again, it's about trying to make sure that we call upon and utilise the expertise of others within the wider system, so that people understand that because a child is adopted doesn't mean that all of their needs are because they were adopted.
Thank you, Sarah, for your responses. Excellent. Well done. Thank you. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may just ask a very quick question, Sarah. Thank you so much for your earlier response to Councillor Johnson's question, because in my head I was actually trying to understand why we have so many young people, so many children with PO placement orders approved, waiting to be matched. And then on the other hand, we have equal number of families who have been approved, waiting to be matched. So it was good that you gave that response. In terms of attracting newer families to the scheme, how do you decide on, which family to send the information pack to? And, for example, also, what happens where perhaps a family is beginning now to think about adoption, and apart from the obvious, let's Google where to find the information, how do they connect with you or with whichever agency to help them to start that journey in place? Thank you.
I think there might be a number of questions in that, so I'll try and answer them, but if I don't get to them, just tell me what they are again. So for people who are inquiring about adoption, there are several websites. So we have our own website, and that will provide information to prospective adopters about how they can make contact with us, and so request a consultation with us. So we have a whole process about how we engage with prospective adopters, and we try and provide a personal touch. So we will hold regular consultation events. So we send out quite a detailed information pack firstly, and then if prospective adopters feel that they want to know more, then they can apply to go to a consultation event. As I say, those are held monthly and they will be booked in for that. It may be that the next month isn't suitable for them, in which case that's fine. We put them on, whenever it's suitable. And those are in person. So obviously during COVID, we weren't able to do that, but we've now gone back to being able to do that in person. There are also other websites. So there is First for Adoption, there's Adoption UK, there's a whole range of different adoption agencies. And prospective adopters can go onto that website, click their postcode, and it will show their nearest adoption agencies. So people don't have to go to their local adoption agency, but often it's quite helpful if they do in terms of support, local support to them. But some prefer to go to a voluntary adoption agency. Others will prefer to go to a local agency. So we're really fortunate in our RAA in that we are able to attract a lot of people who are inquiring about adoption and who then want to go through the process. So last year at any one time we had around about 30 adoptive households who were approved and were waiting for a child. So that's a very fortunate place to be. We were able to place the majority of our children in-house, so with our own adopters. I think we placed 4 children outside of our region last year, and that some of those were due to other factors. So, for instance, if a child has an older sibling who was adopted by an adopter in London, we would always contact those adopters because we would always try and place the siblings together if we can. So there are often reasons for why we place children outside of our region, but we will always aim to try to place within our region. And last year, as I say, we were pleased with how we were able to do that. In terms of, I guess, matching, I think you were asking me about how do we match with a child. So we, our family finders, who I talked about earlier, being identified at a very early stage, will get to know the needs of that child, either by meeting the child or by talking to their social worker, and will then draft what we call is a profile for that child. And we will share those profiles. We also share profiles of our adopters with our family finders. And then there should be some conversations between our family finders and our assessing social workers who are able to say, there's a little boy who's 3 years of age, these are his needs, this family seem like, because we've got a whole comprehensive assessment report which will outline the type of need that they feel they can meet, the type of child that they feel they would be good parents to. And then there should be a conversation, and then there follows a whole process whereby if that's seen as being a potentially good match, we then go into what we call linking. So the child's social worker will visit the prospective adopters and talk about the child. And then we will, if that all works out, then there'll be meetings, there'll be a matching meeting, and then eventually it will go to the adoption panel for a match, and the adoption panel will then hopefully agree that match, and then that will ultimately be agreed by the agency decision maker. So as Leanne said, adoption is very heavily regulated, and there's a lot of time that goes into looking at the needs of a child and how will potential prospective adopters meet those needs. So it is quite a timely process, and we're trying to do it very, very much within the government targets, within the 121 days. So we try and front load it as much as we can, even before the court have agreed that the child's plan should be adoption. We obviously can't take it too far, but we can do some preparation in anticipation, and it may be that the court actually then don't agree with the local authority's care plan and the child will return to their family, but that's fine. But it may be that the child is, the plan is agreed, in which case we're then sort of ready to move and to go forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. So do you do anything to obviously reach out to families who may not even be thinking about adoption, but could become very, successful adopter families?
Yes, so there have been, so with one of the developments over the last, 16, 18 months has been the development of a national team. And what that has led to is a consistent approach with regards to various practices within adoption. One of those is around the recruitment of prospective adopters. So they have brought in an agency to look at recruiting adopters for particular children. So there have been, I think, 3 media campaigns, and some of you may have seen those, looking at, so there was a media campaign for siblings. You know, could some adopters, could you adopt siblings? There was also a media campaign for children of different ethnicities, and there was also a media campaign around, I think it was special needs, looking at that. And then within those media campaigns, I mean, they're very good. They're probably better than anything that we could do locally, because it brings in experts in their field. And those media campaigns have brought in a lot of attention. There are a lot of people in the media who either have adopted themselves, are adopted themselves, and who really want to promote adoption. There are also a lot of families who obviously have adopted and actually want to speak very positively about that. So that the media campaigns contain lots of case studies, lots of videos, lots of webinars. There's a whole range of information. So we will share that. We will share that on our Twitter feed. We will share that on our Facebook. We put that on our website. And we'll put that in our newsletter. So in terms of that, we try very much to link in to that national campaign so that we're part of that. We've also at times been invited to go on the radio. We do a press release. We did a press release this end of last year because we have National Adoption Week in October. So we did a press release in October. And I guess it depends on what else is happening in the news and whether that's picked up by radio stations or whatever. But some of you may have seen that there were articles in national newspapers around National Adoption Week, which are very positive. And again, so often on the back of that, we will receive, we'll receive inquiries on the back of that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, thank you, Sarah, for a very comprehensive report. I move, Chair, that we note the report. I would also like to include the request for some national data in future reports as requested by my colleague, Councillor Osborne.
Is that seconded? Councillor Tranter, thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, gosh. We're now moving on to agenda item 8, the curriculum and diversity, which you'll find on pages 123 through 132. And Rebecca Smith. Hi, I didn't see that. We'll introduce this report, and so if there's anything you wish to add before I open it up for debate.
No, thank you. Just happy to take some questions.
Members.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As I said in my opening statement, I have 2 OSIs, but I would like to just make a couple of points, if I may. Would it be possible, please, on behalf of MACA, for you to actually meet with MACA? Because I know that you are heading up this report, but we are extending the invitation to you to actually meet with us to discuss things. And the thing is that we also said that we've had meetings with Neil Davis, Chief Executive, not me personally, but the other chair has, about an online resource that we could use to be helpfully useful in schools. So that's the second point I'd like to make. Regarding the schools issue, I know that you must have, when you've spoken to Rivermead, you know that we are doing an awful lot. We've got the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Group, of which I happen to be a member. We are definitely on the road to doing quite a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, we couldn't have the last meeting because of COVID, etc., etc. Also, Medway Culture Club are doing an awful lot of stuff with regards to young people. So they are exceptional. And I know that we are doing an awful lot between the two organisations that I've mentioned. And it's very interesting to see that Black History Month, October, has now been agreed that it should not only be in October, because Black history should be taught all the year round, because as we've heard from maybe our young people on the Medway Youth Council before, that they need to know their roots, they need to know where they've come from. And interestingly, there are some interesting conversations being had specifically regarding culture about how young people wear their hair. Because, young people, especially from Black and Afro-Caribbean, they have hairstyles that they need to have because it's a culture thing, excuse me, and sometimes they have been told that they shouldn't be wearing their hair like this. That's just, a point that I would just like to make. But if that invitation could be extended to you, we would definitely like to meet with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So in this report, we've named a number of partners that we have been already in discussion with, and I know that MACA was represented in those early discussions and they're extremely valuable. And the intention of the report now is to go back to the original members of the group and invite their comments and contributions before then circulating the document wider. And already some of that communication is underway, I'm pleased to report. So would be delighted to take up that invitation and extend it further. Secondly, members of the original curriculum diversity group that form the Medway History Heroes in Time publication that will be sent out to schools did include Rivermead, was delighted to report. And as you rightly say, Medway Culture Club continue to do an excellent role across Medway, and I know that across the council we promote their communications on a regular basis through our regular news bulletin that goes out to all schools. So that line of communication will continue, I'm very pleased to state. And then finally, I believe, the point that you rightly make about Black History Month, I think we've made reference to that in one of the sections in the report where we wholeheartedly agree that Black History Month, we need to remove that word month, and we need to be able to capture the essence of this resource that we're talking about here and be able to promote curriculum diversity in a very natural and fluid way throughout all curriculum areas in schools, in both primary, secondary and special schools. And I believe that the resource has been designed in co-production with head teachers and many different education leaders with that commitment very much in mind.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point as a primary school receiving the information that we get from Medway regarding things. I think it's excellent, Rebecca, I really do. You mentioned in the report about the budget being £10,000. For the plans that you've got to sort of scale it up and projects in all schools, do you feel that's enough, or should it be more? And if so, how can that grow?
Thank you. You rightly state the initial budget was 10,000, and that the plans moving forward, as we've outlined here, are very much to work in partnership with the Medway Cultural Education Partnership Group and look at funding streams to extend the Curriculum Diversity Group and the work that it's achieved so far. We believe that the £10,000 will enable us to be able to put this publication out to schools, but beyond that, through Medway Education Partnership Group, we have promoted the idea that currently is under consideration for external funding to launch a number of local artists in residence to take this curriculum resource and to work with a number of key schools which need to be funded, you rightly state, but we're hoping to be successful in doing that in partnership with the Medway Cultural Education Partnership. In the past, we've obtained funding from the Royal Opera House Bridge and their partners around the table, and there's every opportunity that that funding stream may well come our way again, but of course it's not guaranteed at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rebecca Smith. This was a really concise and informative report. I'm really heartened with collaboration and the outcomes from it. I was disappointed Black History Month. I visited most libraries in Medway and there weren't many that had, and I know it was October and it was Black History Month, but I did expect there to be some sort of representation of that throughout Medway, and there wasn't, unfortunately. So, you know, this is great, and it will be a good step forward. So thank you for the conciseness of this report.
Thank you. If I can just add as well, and as a little publicity number, you may well have seen our Medway Histories in Time leaflets and publication posters that are dotted around a number of places, and rightly so. You mentioned about the partnership with libraries needing to be further developed. They've been one of our key partners around the table, and very much willing to be part of promoting this moving forward. So thank you.
Clive.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rebecca, for the report and for all the work that's gone into the resources. The whole initiative is very positive. I've got a bit of a concern about how free schools are to be able to diversify. A lot of academies are no longer bound by the national curriculum, but you know there are restrictions, there are imperatives, perhaps more important than the restrictions. And I'm minded of the GCSE literature syllabus, which was reformed and eliminated a number of ethnic and other cultural writers, much to my own disappointment as an English teacher. So I think there is that issue. And I know schools will be keen to diversify the curriculum in these ways, but I'm just concerned about the extent to which they may have the freedom to do so. The group that worked on this, I can't remember the phrase that you used, my laptop seems to have packed up, included a couple of political members of the administration, which is fine. I'm sure they were able to contribute very purposefully to the group. But I think, you know, given the non-party political nature of the work, there was an opportunity perhaps for that to be to include other counsellors. I know in our group we've got numbers of education professionals, but people also have got expertise in these areas who I'm sure would have been happy to have contributed. And finally, I think I'm right in saying the focus in this work has been ethnicity and race, and that's absolutely, you know, really important and very positive. I wonder if there's opportunities to diversify further as we go forward. I'm thinking particularly of important women in Medway's history. I'm thinking of Lorna Wing, who was a pupil at Chatham Girls' Grammar, who identified autism first. I'm thinking of the suffragettes who hid away so that, at the top of Canterbury Street, so they weren't recorded in the 1911 census, if I've got that right. And you know, there's real opportunities for further work, I think. So I think it's a really positive start. But you know, the possibility of developing, I think, to all of our advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Just a couple of comments, if I may, just to respond. You're absolutely right, of course, about the curriculum review that's going on in schools. And as you said, I think we all have some thoughts in response to some of the revisions that have been made to the curriculum. But the beauty of the system that is in place for curriculums to be designed by schools, and then they are to be held to account by their curriculum and the revision of that and the effective way in which they've implemented those revisions across all their different year groups and phases by Ofsted, and certainly you'll recognise in the recent reports that have been published for perhaps the last year, Ofsted's recognised that curriculums have been in the process of revision, but it's been a noticeable difference that since September Ofsted is now saying those revisions should have taken place. Do the curriculums represent your local communities, and do they and are they promoting I take on board the point that you make about the membership being possibly widened. Thank you. And I think that the final point I'd mention in relation to going back to the curriculum group and suggesting that we may broaden our remit to include possibly the key female and women in our local area. I wish you'd been part of that very lively discussion originally when we really had to rein in our focus, but I don't wish to be flippant because it really did have a sharp focus and we had to be quite clear about where it started and finished, but welcome your suggestions and I think everybody else in the group as well would welcome those, so I'm happy to take them back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased with the report. I think it's very comprehensive, so thank you. I can see thorough work has been done. I'm looking further down to the risk management where you're looking at lack of commitment and support to continue the work of the curriculum diversity projects. You know, organizations such as Medway Culture Group can actually assist in that because I actually was part of when it started off, and I know they've gone really far in terms of the curriculum and supporting schools and supporting children in Medway, so I think that will help mitigate that risk. The other concern that I have would be when you talked about, I mean, I appreciate that we are looking at Black history throughout the year, not just October, you know, where we all, you know, in America, I think it's February, you know, where we're looking at Black History Month. I appreciate that we want to look at it a whole year round, but I don't want us to lose the essence of celebrating that month. It is actually a celebration for that month as well as, you know, looking at the history throughout the year. So I don't want us to lose that focus that, you know, children, Black children actually look forward to celebrating that month. And because we're now moving towards teaching it and talking about it throughout the year, we will lose sight of actually celebrating it. And my children were complaining that, you know, this very last year, not much was done on Black History Month. And she was quite, you know, upset about that. So I guess they're moving towards celebrating it the whole year round. So let's not lose that. As you know, I think there is place for both. Not either or but and. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those comments, and I'm nodding away in agreement. I think I was mindful just of a point that Councillor Harcroft-Scott made earlier about the importance of collaboration, and I think that all these points that you're rightly making need to be shared, and the collaboration work, the collaborative work that we undertake with schools need to hear those points, and I'm very happy to take them back. And I think that the autonomy that schools have to look at their curriculum, and I really welcome that, but at the same time we need to listen to the voice of those young people who may have some concerns or some comments is equally, if not more important than to feed back and make sure that the education leaders are aware of those, and I know they'd welcome them. Thank you.
Any other members? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. As one who was a member of this group, I think it was nice not to have too many politicians there. I liked the fact that the schools took ownership and the various groups that were represented, and they were the ones discussing, you know, and leading in many ways the discussions and giving ideas as to how this was to happen. And Councillor Potter did very, very well, along with you, council officers, to ensure that there was a balance. And the discussions that followed were very, very informative, very enriching. So thank you to you all for your hard work. And we need to obviously thank our partners, the other members and the schools for their involvement, and the enthusiasm that I saw was remarkable. On that note, Chair, I move that the committee notes the contents of the report along with all the other suggestions that our members have made with regards to how to move forward.
Is that seconded? Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. And thank you, Rebecca. But you can't let you go yet because you're starring in the next one, aren't you? Item 8 is going to be tackling racism in schools, and you'll find that on pages 133 through 144 on your pack of papers. Rebecca is going to be introducing the report, so is there anything you wish to add?
No, again, if I'd welcome questions and comments, please, Chair.
Okay, members. Joanne, gosh, that's quick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rebecca Smith. Obviously, we look at the spike after COVID in figures of suspension for racism in our schools. And obviously, the Equalities Commission slammed this government for creating the Windrush scandal and the hostile environment which breeds racism. But my questions locally are, racist incidents are not the whole story of racism in our society, and so much can be just done through conscious and unconscious bias, and people can be ignored or excluded or overlooked because of the colour of their skin. So what I really like to know for Medway schools is how are our schools tackling racism? How do we know that? And how are we challenging our schools to challenge indifference?
Thank you, Councillor Howcroft-Scott. I think obviously we've reported very briefly within this about the exclusion data that we hold for permanent exclusions, which are clearly then related to a racial incident or racist abuse incident. We use the criteria that the Department for Education set to be able to gather that information from schools, and schools obviously report against that. But we were very mindful when the cross-directorate request came from the Prevent group that what did we know about the number of racist incidents in schools and how were schools recording that and reporting that to the council. And whilst that isn't a statutory responsibility for the council, we of course still wanted to know for all the reasons that we would understand here today. And as such, we created the online survey working with schools, asking some schools during that process for their feedback and for their thoughts, how best we could support them in being able to report to their governing bodies or their trust boards what would be most useful in what format. There is no requirement to ask schools or to demand schools to tell us about those incidents, but we're inviting them to use it as a resource that would support their reporting. And also through that, of course, we're raising the profile and the importance of being able to capture pupil voice, capture the restorative justice aspect of addressing incidents as they happen. But what I'm trying to capture in my reply is that there have been a number of recent responses to raise the profile of this and to widen schools' understanding where that's necessary. Of course, I mustn't generalise because there are many schools, I'm very confident, that have a full understanding of this issue. However, we wanted to support them in being able to fully analyse that, which is why we've responded in the way that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. In my constituents, there is a school that's struggling at the moment that I'm sort of talking to, but it's inter-community racism that's the challenge, because they're both ethnic minority groups that are tackling one another or being unkind really to one another, and parents are not seeing proactively what schools are doing about it really, and that's how it sort of lands at a councillor domain, if you like. But I'm really do embrace how you know, in my time, since 1990, when I moved into Medway, it's become much more multicultural. And you know, I think a lot of that is reflected in our schools. But, you know, I do worry, and I'm, you know, Vice Chair of Governors at a number of schools, about the lack of expertise in training for equal opportunity issues like unconscious bias, really. And I think if those things go overlooked, unless you've been a victim of racism or, you know, a survivor of some kind of prejudice, then actually you're not really, you know, challenging everything, and everything should be challenged. But restorative justice is a really good way forward, I agree.
Just on a follow-up point to that, if I may, part of my role is to liaise with both head teacher associations for both the primary and the secondary schools. And as I hope you would expect, that we will be talking with both head teacher associations following the first round of information that we gather from the surveys and the racial incidents reporting, feeding that back to them and inviting their comment. And I think the point that you make about linking that with training opportunities, both in trusts, both across maintained and academy schools, and capitalising on some of the existing resources that are out there, would be part of that wider discussion with the associations.
Thank you.
Chair, Rebecca answered my question in her first response, so thank you.
Pat, then.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rebecca. This report is sort of linked very much with the previous report that you know, we have been reading. I was interested to reference the data on unschooled racial abuse incidents on page 136, and it says that the reports are in arrears, but this one says 2016-17. I mean, that's more than in arrears. That's a few years ago. So, you know, that information seems to have been a bit, or more than, rather outdated in that particular paragraph. And can I also say that I looked at this report and I read it a couple of times, and I'm thinking there's lots of statistics here about, you know, how many percentages of children that we've actually got and the ethnicity and everything else. But for me, it doesn't actually say what we are doing about preventing racism in schools. It just says that what schools are doing, but what are we doing as a council to help this? Because it doesn't sort of say very much about what we are doing. And the information about the online form, which Councillor Harcourt's got and what you have mentioned, has been provided. How many schools are sending the information back about any racist incidents? Because that might be something that we might need to, you know, to ask about. And as I've said before, you know, there's lots of information here about non-white learners, etc., etc. Racism is a horrid thing. It can lead to not just only young people being humiliated in schools, but unfortunately it can go further, because it not only happens in schools, it can happen online as well. And when you get cyberbullying like this, you know, with racial overtones, and if a young person is sitting looking at this and reading this on their computer, which hopefully they will be in a room with adults, but it's not always the way, you know, this is something that needs to be looked at as well. And I know about Prevent because, you know, we have to do governor training on different things, and one of these I've just done. But the online stuff is also something that really needs to be looked at. And I couldn't see anything in the report written here about anything to do with cyberbullying.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Just to reassure you that the point you raised about the exclusion data, what the report is trying to say, and apologies, I haven't said it very clearly, is that since 2016/17, there have been 3 permanent exclusions due to racist abuse. So it's since that time. It's not that that was the benchmark that we've then measured it from that point forwards. Is that okay? And you asked the question about the number of racial incidents that have been reported. In December, I looked at the latest reporting outcomes, and we had 14 incidences that were captured by schools. And I think it's because I recognise that it's a resource that schools are just becoming familiar with and starting to use more confidently. And as I say, it's been refined based on some of the feedback that we've been given, and it's reflected a model which both has been present in Kent, and we wanted to work with our partners in Kent and the Prevent team, which understandably you made reference to as well. So I'm hoping that the number of responses that we have continue to grow, not because we want to hear about more incidences, but because we see people, more schools are going to be responding. And we have been tracking and seeing if there are any particular schools or trusts or groups of schools in particular zones who aren't using that resource, and we will be making contact and gently suggesting or offering the opportunity for a discussion if we'd like some more refinements to be made to ensure that everybody utilises it as a resource. Just to come back to what are Medway Council doing as in response, you rightly make reference to the curriculum diversity group. Understandably, again, you make reference to the Prevent officers and the tight partnership we have with the education safeguarding team, who work very closely with the Prevent team, as do the teams that I manage in the wider education service, and promote through the regular bulletin that goes out to schools, the briefing sessions that we have, for example, with our designated safeguarding leads to make them aware of the Prevent officer role for training, communication, the response to any online bullying incidents that they would benefit from receiving some additional support. So it's obviously a very wide and broad issue, but I'm confident that we do have a number of people and officers to support that, linking in with colleagues from outside of the directorate as well, such as those in police and the wider services. So the cyberbullying would also come in as part of the Prevent agenda, but also at the same time, our IT team do offer and signpost regularly in the head teacher's bulletin a number of support agencies and mechanisms for schools to use, and as part of our PSHE, our personal social health education and sex and relationships education work coming out of the health service and the team within Medway, then work is done directly with coordinators in schools offering that support as well, and regularly promoted again through regular communication and through the bulletins out to schools.
Thank you, Chair. This is a curious question, and there's many facets to it. Why is it that children that speak an additional language is regarded as SEND, special educational needs, requiring educational health care plan? Because I've attended a number of forums within Medway now, and parents find it very offensive that, when they receive that form from school, asking them to fill out how many languages, or if English is your second language, they are reluctant to fill it, and some of them have to leave it blank or just say that English is their first language because they feel that they're going to be discriminated against. So talking about tackling racism in school, they feel like they're going to be discriminated against because their child speaks another language. Does not necessarily mean, although there are global development issues and trying to bring the child up to speed, and I appreciate that, but there are children who actually are competent and they can comprehend, and some of them speaking French, Spanish, English, or even African language. If they can speak that, it takes intelligence for that child to speak, 3-4 languages in the house. So why would we regard that as special educational need? That's where my curiosity lies. And is this something that we can actually look into, that parents and the children don't actually feel discriminated against, that, they are intelligent, they don't need that special educational support, they can comprehend, even if they speak more than one language, if they're multilingual or bilingual. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't express the sadness that I hear when you've described the confusion between English as an additional language with special educational needs. It is not. And I think that if head teachers were to hear that, collectively they too would share that grave disappointment. I think I can think of one incident a number of years ago in a discussion with a head who was confused regarding somebody's ability and confused that with their access to language, access to English. It should not be confused that special educational needs is connected with English as an additional language. It's just a myth that, not a myth, a confusion, a lack of understanding that shouldn't be present. And I'm very confident that head teachers that we have in Medway do not make that association. So I'm hugely saddened to hear some of your experiences, which are very real. I don't question that at all. But I can't state enough. It isn't special educational needs. And again, trust leaders, education leaders and directors across Medway, Ofsted Regional Schools Commissioner, the Regional Director as they're now known, are very, very clear that English as an additional language is not special educational needs, should be considered that in any form.
Thank you. Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for this report. It's very interesting, and certainly some of the outcomes. I look forward to seeing where this goes. This report is very metrics heavy, so it explains, some of the data sets that are coming out and we've looked at over the last couple of years. What I'm quite interested to know, in looking at other authorities, they have a bit more of a holistic approach when it comes to looking at the curriculum. So I'll just refer you to the National Education Union anti-racism sort of charter which they've done. So they've broken it down into 7 areas, one of which is looking at racist incidents in schools, but they've also suggested that there should be a review of leadership to look at the ethnic makeup of leaders in education. So it includes head teachers, vice principals, those in principal or senior leadership positions. A look at teaching and learning policies. Again, a lot of this will be Ofsteded anyway, so this is not like it needs to be duplicated. And in fact, for staff workload purposes, it probably shouldn't be duplicated. Power and voice, wellbeing and belonging. So I just want to, the question I have is that are we too fixated perhaps on the overall metrics, whilst actually there are other sort of holistic issues which probably have more of an impact in terms of where education is going. And is there a chance for the next report that maybe we look at some of those issues as well? And again, I don't know if there's an answer for that or not. And also, just as a colleague has raised, the ethnic makeup of some of our governing bodies as well, in terms of our Medway governors, how is that comprised? Because these people have leadership roles in deciding curriculum and diversity in curriculum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. I embrace the points that you make, and I recognise the data profile or the data sort of prevalence within the report, and embrace that reflection or the consideration of a staffing profile or governing body profile in relation to ethnicity. And I think that bodies like the National Association of Head Teachers or other teaching and leadership organisations do provide some very high quality materials, which of course is their role to be able to facilitate reflections or drive some improvement within schools, and we'd certainly be promoting those with our schools. And through the regular liaison meetings that we have with some of our teaching union representatives in schools, again, we'd be making reference to that. So, but I think the explicit points that you raise, yes, I fully embrace them, and I think that will be informative in future reporting.
Thank you. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Last year, I had to offer support to a parent whose child had been accused of racism. And it's a very harrowing case, to be honest with you. The child was about to be, the following day, I think, to be interviewed by the police in connection with this. So naturally, I gave advice about making sure the child had proper representation and so on and so forth, as I'm sure you'd expect that to happen. And as the outcome of this particular case was such that there were sufficient witnesses, and it was found that no racism had taken place whatsoever, but it was in fact the complete opposite. It was the child that was making the accusation and whose parent became deeply involved. Now, the reason I say this is because there is a general assumption that someone who is racist is white. And in this particular case, it was completely the opposite, and would have been just as devastating, as I'm sure anyone would agree, that a child would be interviewed by the police and go through an horrendous experience and put themselves at some risk. Now, this particular case, I don't know how prevalent things like this are, but false accusation of such a degree is a terrible thing. And is this being picked up and dealt with as robustly as actual incidents of racism?
Thank you for the question. The incident that you describe, I similarly have heard of something along the same lines. And I think what we would all recognise is the importance of robust investigation processes in a school. And in terms of the governance and the trust arrangements to hold leaders to account and to look at behaviour, incidences, whether they be connected with those that you've just outlined or of another nature, the tracking and the recording of those incidents is absolutely essential. I think what would worry me mostly is if a school is reporting that they have no incidences. However, we've already mentioned the importance of something like restorative justice, and schools increasingly adopt such approach to ensure a consistency of recording and a robustness around the follow-up of such a, whether it be a valid accusation for both the victim and the perpetrator and those around the incidents. We're talking in very broad terms, but what I want to essentially pick up on, and the points that you make and understandably make, is the importance of investigation. And I'm minded of the thoroughness through which schools are expected and absolutely embrace recording a safeguarding incident. Then this similarly, through using the same sorts of processes in terms of recording, interviewing, independently investigating should it be appropriate to do so, and then tracking incidences and reporting, again, patterns to a governing body or to a trust board is all part of this process. So schools are held to account, again, at a trust level or by Ofsted to see what their recording processes are and to see the thoroughness and the rigorous nature of their investigation and their follow-up activities and actions, because it isn't enough just to be able to report an incident or record an incident. It's the so what factor that's so essential as well. And schools, again, are becoming, a number of them are very, very competent at doing this, but where processes haven't been in place, I think we've seen a necessary increase on the focus of this through inspection and through working within trusts and on a school-to-school basis.
Thank you very much, and I am very reassured by your response. I don't think it requires further comment, but underneath what I was saying was, had the accusation, had it been true, what this child was accused of, it would have had serious consequences. But because it was found out to be untrue, there were no consequences. I hope you can see my point there, and I hope that's not lost. And I know we're learning through this, and hopefully the day will come when we don't have to be having these discussions. We're not there yet, but thank you.
Yeah. If I can just add further to that, I'd almost forgotten about it, but it brought to mind. A few years ago, I was the chair of the complaints committee of a local school, and there was a complaint of racism, which went through all the various stages and ended up with the committee of governors, and we in fact found that there was no case to answer. So the parents then decided that the committee itself was racist and was going to take legal action. But when we provided them with all the evidence of all the reporting of the meetings and various things, it was decided that there was no case to answer, and the case was in fact dropped. But no, it's just backing up what Stuart was saying. This does happen, and the importance of evidence is crucial. Any other member?
Seeing as we're sharing all our experiences of racism, my grandson, and he's not an angel, please believe me, he's a little so-and-so, but he was at college and he couldn't understand his lecturer, and he kept constantly saying, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand you." And he did go and he did say that, and the lecturer was a coloured gentleman, and he did say to his superiors that he didn't understand, and nobody took any notice. So William B and William decided, well, nobody's listening to me, I'm certainly not going back to lectures anymore that I don't understand. So my son got a letter of complaint saying that he was going to be expelled for racism. And now this shocked my son, because, anyway, he went to the tribunal and he was going to be thrown out of college. And what happened was my grandson said he didn't understand what racism was. And they looked at him, so he said, if racism, to me, he said, is loving somebody. He said, because my Oma, which is grandmother in Dutch, he said, is as black can be, and I love her dearly. And I think that we have to be very careful how we approach these things, because if, because he isn't. I mean, his grandma and his uncle, they're all black, and he loves them all dearly. And he doesn't look at people in colour. He looks at people for what they are. And I think that sometimes we can get carried away. And I do hope that we will all look round, and does it matter what colour our skin is? We're all human beings, and I think we should all work together to be one. And if we instill that into our children, we're going to have a much better world. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair.
It's interesting that conversation started off with Councillor Tranter, because I've actually, as part of my closing statement, I've scribbled down something I was going to say as a statement. While it is a known fact that non-white British learners are more likely to experience racism, I would like to add that white British learners sometimes experience racism also. So it is important for us to educate both sides, making them know that racism is not only a crime, it's evil. And also to facilitate and enable the white British learner who is also experiencing racism, okay, to give them the platform to be able to come out freely and state their case. Because there might be others. I used to be a school teacher myself, so I know that these things happen. Whilst it may be a lot easier to believe a non-white British learner, okay, when they bring forward a case of racism, it may be difficult for the same thing to happen to the white British learner. So it's important for us to bear that in mind. There are our young people, white British learners, who are also suffering one way or the other racism in schools. And I do like what Councillor Purdy said, we need to work together to make it a better place for everybody. And that's my contribution to that. Chair, I move that the committee note the contents of this report.
Is that seconded? Councillor Tranter, thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, gosh. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for that. Excellent. Okay, I'm sure it's item 9, but Stephanie, we're going to introduce the report on the work programme. So the floor is yours.
I don't actually have anything much to add, just to bring attention to the box on the work programme that states items to be determined. We have put Ofsted monitoring update. I believe that there is an inspection that's due to happen, but we don't actually know the exact date of that as yet. If it does happen before the March meeting, then we will have a report at that meeting.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Who's going to second that then? Well, if you do, it's Councillor trying to second it. Is that agreed? Well, the meeting is ended. And amazing, not even 9 o'clock yet. What am I going to do with the rest of my evening?
Not bad at all.